Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. Today we've got something a bit different but special lined up for you. We're dedicating this entire episode to answering your questions. And joining me today is Brett Warren, National Director of Metropole Properties, and we're going to be answering your questions including: why don't we like recommending Perth when that market's performing so well? Should I pay off my home loan before I buy an investment property? How do you remain positive when the media is full of negative messages? And what are your views on restricting foreign investing in Australia? Now, whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting off, stick around because we've got some great questions and I think some even better answers that should give you some insights and some clarity. So let's jump right into the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
We get many questions left for us on our podcast website and on social media and on Property Update. So today we're diving into what used to in the old days be called the mailbag and answering some of your burning questions. And I'm joined by Brett Warren, National Director of Metropole Properties. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Michael. How are you going?
Good, thank you. Now, Brett, this is a question that comes up in lots of ways, but Adrian from Western Australia, and I can understand why he asked that, said, first of all, he said, thank you for the great content on your podcast. You always seem to suggest investing in the three big capital cities on the East Coast and keep telling us to avoid Perth, when Perth's been the strongest property market in the last couple of years. Have you changed your views on Perth, he asks. Good question, Brett. What would you say to Adrian?
Well, I'll probably take this question, Michael, because I'm actually born in Perth. I lived the first probably 2/3 of my life in Perth, and I'm now in Brisbane, obviously. But I've been investing in Perth myself, and I guess just to give you a little bit of background, Perth has performed exceptionally well in the last couple of years, and to be honest, it's probably likely to do a little bit better than most of the markets in the next year or two as well. So
I agree with that.
There's nothing wrong there. However, I guess if you're looking to invest your money in where we recommend our clients putting our money, we're looking for two things. We're looking for something to be strong and something to be stable and relatively low risk. So we don't like volatility and unfortunately see that a fair bit in the WA market. Decades of evidence, when you look back, confirms that it's one of the biggest influences on property markets is the economy. And unfortunately, WA's economy is driven by, I guess, 49% by mining. So that's a bit of an issue. Whereas if you look at the Sydney and Melbourne and slowly Brisbane starting to have more pillars to the economy, they've got above average influence and they've got strong services sectors like banking, insurance and tourism. And obviously we receive a lot from international students as well. So unfortunately, WA accounts for a lot of that kind of mining revenue. And I think it was 130 billion last year and those other valuable exports. But the other problem is that out of that mining revenue, 50% of it comes from one customer, and that's China, Michael.
Now, that's a concern when you have such a dependency, and we know that China's got more than its own share of problems.
It certainly does. It's got that export revenue, and I guess history proves there is a link between the mining booms and Perth property markets. I can take my mind back to, I guess, 2005 and 6 when the Perth and Sydney house prices were pretty much level at one stage. And Unfortunately, Perth probably trended sideways for about a decade, and Sydney went on to obviously triple in value. So that's a bit of a concern for me. Yes, definitely, Perth will perform well in the next couple of years, but what's going to happen? What's the outlook for Perth once that mining sector starts to decrease? As we spoke about before, I'd rather not have my money in a volatile type of market.
Well, I guess there's more opportunities than anyone can spend their money on. Your money's going to run out more sooner than the opportunities will. So most investors, though, are herd animals. They dive into the markets when they read prices have risen 15 to 20% or 50% in the last 3 years, like Perth has. But interestingly, buying in such a market at present in particular, after the peak, or near the peak, in my mind, has got some concerns. Interestingly, only today in the Financial Review, a prominent Perth buyer's agent who used to be the president of the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia, and he's gone out on public saying it, so I'm allowed to mention Damien Collins there, said he'd be really cautious about buying in many of the suburbs where investors are buying at the current prices because they've run ahead of the broader market. what has happened in Perth in particular, some of these really strong growth areas have happened because of East Coast buyers buying there because of the perceived, it wasn't the perceived, it was also the true cheaper properties there. But we know, you and I have been speaking to others in the industry, and the local buyers agents from the East Coast don't even go there. They get the local selling agent to do a FaceTime or a WhatsApp video, and they buy sight unseen, paying more than what the locals do. So the smart money probably did make money there, Adrian, a couple of years ago, but now it's focused on places at an earlier stage in their growth cycle. So it was interesting that the ex-president of the REIWA, the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia, and somebody who's got a buyer's agency interest said, be careful. We similarly have got clients there who are in the property industry, Brett, who similarly said it's just been fed by East Coast investors. And my concern is what's going to happen to those particular markets when the East Coast investors say no more, because the locals aren't going to pay that price, Brett.
No, that's exactly right. They're not. And again, we get back to those having multiple pillars in the economy. So if something disappears, there's others to prop the economy up. So if we're not looking towards Perth, Michael, where would you be looking?
Well, if we're looking at a counter-cyclical opportunity, there's definitely opportunities in the Melbourne property market. Now, we've been helping our clients buy investment properties in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, and those who are buying in Melbourne are doing it for various reasons, and we're telling them, at the end of this year, I promise you, Perth's prices will have gone up more than your Melbourne one will, and probably even next year. But you're going to get a free kick as the Melbourne market catches up. At the moment, the Melbourne economy is a bit on the nose. And it's really interesting, the comment you made right at the beginning, that one of the biggest factors affecting local property markets, because they're all running at different rates, is the local economy. There's also not the huge undersupply of properties in Melbourne that there are in other areas at the moment, but we know that it's underpinned by one of the largest economies, state economies, boosted by strong population growth, actually the strongest in the country, and it hasn't had the price growth in the past couple of years that Sydney and Brisbane have had. Now, I'm not saying Melbourne's the only place to invest. There's not one Melbourne property market, but some areas are, to get a growth rate of 2%, 2.5% that it's had so far this year, and they'll probably get to 4% this year. There are some areas that have had double that and others that have had half, and that's how averages work. But I think that this, as interest rates fall and as the economy eventually picks up, with the current ultra-low vacancy rates, it's just all the precursors, everything set, that perfect storm for considerably strong growth.
I tend to agree. I think Melbourne's an international city, isn't it? So it's not as if something's gone away, a mining's left town or something's been shut down that's affecting it. It's really just, I guess, different type of market influences, but the long-term fundamentals aren't there. So it's really important that people understand that.
Well, I think you've got to wonder where the property market that you're buying in is going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, not what the interest rates or what it's going to be in a year's time. But Brett, I understand why the herd mentality is driving people to go to those areas where the media is telling you they're going to do really well this year. So, Adrian, thank you for your question. By the way, we're not biased to Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. We're biased to where our clients, and to be blunt, our own money is going to do well. And that's why we're also biased towards residential real estate. But I know Brett and I have got other investments as well. So thanks for the question. Now, there's another question here by Sue Williams from Drummoyne. She said, my parents taught me to get a good education, get a good job, eventually buy my own home and pay it off before I invest. But this seems to go against your philosophy. So my question is, Sue asks, should I pay down my non-tax deductible home loan debt first, or should I put money into buying an investment property? Now, that's a good question because I was taught that as well. A lot of people have been.
Michael, this question takes me back to your seminars. When I used to sit in your front row at the seminars, and you'd always ask people, put your hands up if you work hard and you've got a good job, and everyone would put their hands up, and then you'd say, put your hands up if you're wealthy, and 99% of people would pull their hands down. So
I forgot that. Gee, you got a good memory.
Yeah, what we're taught is not necessarily the right thing, is it? And potentially this is another way of looking at things, because obviously non-deductible debt's not a good thing, but not at the expense of growing and widening an asset base. And I guess that's what comes next.
Sure. So what would your answer be for Sue?
Well, look, when it comes to financial security, obviously the traditional advice centers around, getting a good job, paying off your mortgage as quickly as possible, and you get a certain peace of mind from that. However, this strategy, as we've just pointed out, is not going to make you wealthy necessarily. So instead, using the funds to invest in property can potentially offer greater benefits.
I was listening to Morgan Housel, who is somebody I highly respect. We often quote him. He's a very clever author in America, and he was on somebody's podcast and they asked him, what do you invest in? And he's one of the great thinkers about investment, and he explained that he's actually bought his home and he's paid it off, and he had a fixed, in America they have 30-year mortgages, he had a fixed loan mortgage rate of 3.2% for 30 years. But in fact, he chose to pay it off because it gave him the peace of mind and security. And so therefore he's got some cash. He definitely invests in a small group of shares, and he's got his home with no debt. He believes that property is not a good investment. And a lot of Americans are doing that. So you're seeing it on social media, you're hearing it on podcasts. The rules are very different in the United States. So again, be careful who you listen to. I hear what you said just a second ago. It gives peace of mind. The question is, at what cost does that come, Brett?
Well, it is. It's almost like a seesaw. You either get the opportunity now to get that level of safety, or maybe put that on hold so you're feeling a little bit safer in retirement if you've been able to grow a greater level of wealth. And I guess the number one thing to consider at the moment, even though interest rates are reasonably increased reasonably a bit in the last few years, they're still relatively low. And I know a lot of people who probably have purchased a home in the last 2 to 3 years are probably on a cheaper rate as well. So there's probably an opportunity there to leverage some of your funds. And rather than paying down deductible debt, maybe put that into a property that will then compound and leverage and grow and give you greater rates of return that can actually, increase over the short term to create more wealth for you.
Yes, yeah.
The other thing is again, leveraging off that is the opportunity cost of capital. So, I guess one of the key concepts in investment is the opportunity cost. So when you're paying off your mortgage, if you're paying principal and interest especially, you're paying maximum funds down to paying off a loan, where, as we said before, you could easily change that around and potentially put those funds out to work harder for you. And while that may seem like a safer bet to pay down your mortgage, consider what you might earn if you invested those funds elsewhere. And I know you've put a case study in one of your books, Michael, about that, where you've explained how well-located investments have historically delivered wealth-producing rates of return. And if you've only just got one property, which is your home, that's a cost of shelter. It's not really investing for your future, is it?
Well, interestingly, anyone who bought a property in Brisbane over the last year or two has had double-digit growth. The median price of Brisbane's gone up $100,000 a year. And yes, they may have saved 20, 30, they wouldn't even get that much in their mortgage. But it's right, it's the opportunity cost of using the money elsewhere, Brett.
Look, I guess the other thing about property, Michael, and the reason we like property, particularly when you're starting, is because you can leverage more, don't you? You can put down a 10 or a 20% deposit, but you're controlling 100% of an asset. And if you're getting those kinds of returns we were talking about, you're effectively multiplying your investment power. And I think that's really, really important to understand. Even if you're putting your money in the share market and things like that as well, you probably can't leverage it as effectively as you can with a property and get those higher rates of return. And again, the bank doesn't get any share of that kind of growth as well. So you can actually, I guess, pull that out and refinance and leverage even further.
Good point.
Michael, there's also tax advantages in there as well, isn't there?
Yeah, of course. As an investment, but not as your home.
Yes.
Interestingly, in America, you can actually get your home mortgage is tax deductible. So the rules are very different. So when you hear Robert Kiyosaki say your home's not an asset, and you hear Morgan Housel say I'm paying it off, they're playing a different game of Monopoly than we are. So, the tax advantages are really good as an investor. So you're actually using other people's money. You're using the bank's money to buy the property, using the tenant's money to help pay down the mortgage. You're using depreciation, so using the government's money to give you some tax benefits. So, in fact, there's quite a number of reasons why you should consider it. Now, interestingly, it's not right for everybody, and that's one of the reasons why when we actually see a client at Metropole, even before we talk about property or location, we put a strategic plan together. And I know as wealth strategists actually run a number of scenarios, Brett, and one of them is, okay, let's see. So rather than do this on gut feel, and a lot of people's gut feel is nerves and tension and butterflies in the tummy, or on assumptions of what your parents said because they learned it from their grandparents, why not do the numbers and figures, Brett?
Yep, I think that's a great idea, and starting with the end in mind. And actually putting the numbers in place, as you said before, maybe paying down your debt versus buying another investment property and actually showing you the physical numbers. So I think that's a really good point.
And that's why we always start by putting a strategic plan together. So if you're interested in getting involved in property, whether it's to buy a home or an investment property, I'm sorry, I'm going to put a plug in, Brett, to see your team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au and run the numbers, run the figures, and then you can actually see and what the cost may be not to invest, to pay down your home soon. And the answer is that cost worth that peace of mind? Peace of mind has to have some cost, and we all got different risk profiles, Brett. But I also think that if you pay off your home and you give the money back to the bank, you actually have don't have the liquidity if things go wrong. So at least get the right finance strategy, and sometimes you end up putting the money into an offset account, so you could use it as a deposit for other things, but you've got to structure it right, otherwise you're not going to get the right tax benefits, or you at least have the money there in case you need to draw it out at some stage in the future if things go wrong, health, illness, jobs, other things. And I like the fact that you're going to have a number of assets. So whether it's buying property or buying shares, consider. So to answer your question, deciding whether to prioritise paying off your mortgage or an investment, yes, it is a personal choice. It depends upon your risk tolerance, your financial goals, as Brett said, your investment strategy. And if security and peace of mind is what you want, great. However, if you're wanting to grow your wealth, if you're prepared to do the hard things now to have an easier life later, then I don't think it's the right way to go, Brett.
Look, yeah, I think so. And I think you've made a really good point. I think putting those numbers on a plan is really important. A lot of people really worry about what happens next. And if you can actually see that written down and understand the numbers behind it, you can balance that out with an emotional decision and a safety factor and things as well. But it's really going to allow you to do that. And I think we provide a lot of peace of mind for people by doing those numbers for them.
Definitely. Okay, Craig from Butterham asked a question. I know it's an election year and politicians are looking to win future votes, but what are your thoughts about stopping foreign investors from buying in Australia? In general, they can only buy new property. Isn't that good? Or are they really competing with first-home buyers? Well, I know Peter Dutton, in his budget rebuttal, is that the right word, proposed a 2-year ban on foreign buyers buying property, and he said it's a way of helping affordability to locals. In my mind, it was really just the beginning of his election campaign. In the recent Brisbane state budget, the state treasurer in Brisbane has put even further restrictions on foreign borrowers, difference in stamp duty and difference in holding costs, and even restricted foreign developers from investing in the market as well. I think in general, the number of foreign buyers buying is too small a share of the total buying pool to make all that much difference. Yes, technically, they're only allowed to buy existing properties. They've got to buy, not to buy new properties. They can't buy existing properties. Look, in practice, it's a bit different. If you are here and you have a short-term visa or student visa, you can actually buy a property. But if you leave the country, it's established property. If you leave, you've got to give it, sell it. But in general, foreign demand does have some impact, but it's suggested it's only about 5% of the market. Now, I know 5% is still 5%. It does make a difference against the margins, but it doesn't make a big difference. Brett, I like the fact that foreign developers and investors built a lot of those large towers of apartments. They were bought by overseas investors who wanted to bring their money to Australia for different reasons, Brett, not what we bring our money into property for. They just wanted to get into a safe country. And while we'd never recommend investing in those buildings, they actually did provide accommodation for a lot of Australians and for a lot of students as well. So they created the last property boom, but they're not around to create the next wave of development, Brett.
No, they're not at the moment. And I think part of that crackdown has obviously resulted in, those properties not being built in some cases and not being rented out. And that's why we've got a bit of a rental situation at the moment that's not going to go away. But
you're being very polite calling it a situation. It really is a crisis.
It's a disaster.
Is it really true that there are 10 cities in Brisbane under the bridges and things like that?
It is. It's
terrible.
It is. It's horrible. It's horrible, but it is a crisis, Michael, and it's a structural issue that's going to take a long time to resolve. So I think these are more politically motivated statements. As you said, 5%, but I question whether, it's going to, I guess, compete with home buyers. Home buyers don't really like those big castles and big towers and things like that as well. So I don't think it's going to do much for home buyers and reducing, I guess, the competition there, which is a bit of a shame.
It is. So interestingly, The Australian newspaper recently reported that a lot of troubled Chinese sellers are desperately trying to send their money back to China in order to save their failing companies. And it's causing, well, they use the word landslide of investors selling up. There is a sell-off of foreign investors at the moment, and I think they're having trouble finding somebody to buy their properties because most locals would recognise that they're what we'd call secondary properties here. But interestingly, at the same time, PropTrack, which is run by REA, realestate.com, they ran a search report recently, overseas search report, showing that volumes of search from overseas, because they can see where people come to from on realestate.com, has increased. Volumes of search to rents went up 32% in April, and to buy 20%, much higher than the 5-year averages. So there does seem to be a little resurgence of people interested in coming here. But at the end of the day, I just think this is all political talk. As you said, I don't think for a second Dutton actually really is going to actually ban foreign buyers. He may make it harder for them. I mean, a while ago, the various governments made it harder. They pulled out the welcome mats. It's interesting how things changed. A couple of years ago, they really welcomed foreign buyers, Brett.
Yep, it's the political cycle, like the property cycle, I guess. But look, one more question here from Andy from Newcastle, Michael. I know you suggest avoiding listening to the short-term predictions in the media and instead having a long-term focus. But I'm finding it really hard to be positive at the present and make the big financial decision of getting into the property investment market when there are so many different people telling us about all the things that could go wrong with property. I understand that now you've been around this block a few times. It's easier for you to have perspective, but how does the beginning investor like me have confidence to move forward?
That's a really good question, Andy. It was much easier for me when I started because there wasn't social media, there weren't blogs, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't podcasts. In fact, property statistics only came out once a year in Victoria, where it was the only place I invested for years. Came from what was called the Valuer General, and they were sales statistics that came out once a year that related to sales that happened about 18 months ago. Interestingly, the holders of the property information in those days, Brett, were the local estate agents. They knew their local market, they knew what sold, what transacted, they knew what auctions sold, but you really didn't have all the information. So to be honest, I didn't understand anything about the economy. I was naive. I just made investment decisions. By the way, I happened to get it right. But now with the 24-hour news cycle, things are very different, Andy. I can understand your concern. Experienced investors know, though, that uncertainty is a constant companion. I'm just used to it now. But while the human mind craves certainty, unfortunately, there's none to be found in the investment markets. Just look what happened this year alone. Interest rates were going to start falling in the middle of the year. Oh, no, it's going to happen later in the year. No, unemployment's going to go up. No, it's come down again. Inflation's under control. No, it's not. There's a war overseas that's lasted 2 years. There's another one that's lasted 7-8 months. Who would have thought that these things were going on? And so there's a bogeyman coming around from the corner all the time. It has all different sort of flavours. So there's things that you think about. They're the known unknowns, the things we know we don't know. And they're the unknown unknowns, the things we don't know we don't even know. Now, the former category, the known unknowns, that's what investors tend to concern themselves with. Currently, as I said, inflation starting to ease. We know in 12 months' time there's going to be election uncertainties, and that's then eventually going to pass too. And the ongoing wars, they're slowly going to move on. They have actually already moved from the front pages now to the middle of the newspapers. These matters will end. But what surprises us, what catches us out of the blue, and is the unknown unknowns. There are always previous surprises that sort of come to us. I mentioned Morgan Housel a while ago. He actually said history is a constant chain of surprises. So while the known unknowns get all the attention, all the stuff in the media because they know about it, it's the unknown unknowns, I keep repeating myself, that causes investors the most trouble. Surprise creates the panic, and panic's an emotion that leads to poor financial decisions. And history is full of surprises, Brett. I remember the economic surprises years ago when there was an Asian crisis that affected our economy, the global financial crisis in 2008. I remember I was actually in Brisbane. We had our office in Brisbane then, and I remember driving through Fortitude Valley when I heard in the news in the car the collapse of Lehman Brothers had sent shockwaves across the globe. I can still picture it in my mind's eye as I'm saying it. Having said that, I came out of the blue. That was an unknown. Financial markets seized up, economies plummeted. And then gee, it wasn't that long ago we were blindsided by coronavirus, that invisible enemy that brought the world to its knees. In 2020, I suffered more than you did. The COVID pandemic shut down economies, shut down our cities, made us act stupidly and buy toilet paper. We panicked. Remember the queue for toilet paper, Brett? Where on earth did that come from?
Oh, no.
So,
no.
Andy, I've learned to prepare, not predict. And Brett, you and I have spoken about that before. Rather than having forecasts, I have assumptions. But because by definition, we can't predict the next global or financial surprise or what's going on. But based on the track record of serial forecasters, it's not even worth searching for the answers in the media, Andy, either. As investors, it's prudent to assume we're going to frequently be surprised. We're going to keep being surprised by what's going to come to us. So, Andy, just be expecting of the surprise. So how can you prepare for something you can't predict? You can't, but you can plan for it. You can plan for your plan not to go to plan. So while we don't know what's going to bring around the next round of panic, Andy, we can reliably predict some consequences. So initially, that's why, actually, Brett, we said a while ago, we start with a plan. And then we stress test the plan, and we stress test the financial plans to give the ability to get long-term results, expecting there to be frequent hiccups. We allow for cash flow buffers for emergencies, only owning quality assets that are not going to be as valuable. And every time a surprise happens, Andy, it lifts your short-term focus. You think about the short-term survival, but really I encourage you to look at the long-term and accept Australia's fundamentals to remain strong. Over the long term, our economy is going to remain strong because we're going to keep digging things out of the ground and selling them overseas. We're going to keep growing things in the ground and selling food to Asia. We're going to keep educating overseas people, and that'll bring money in, and we're going to have tourism. So all I can say to you, mate, is when it comes, the next storm will pass like all the others beforehand.
Michael, it's really a game, isn't it? It's taking the emotion out of it and understanding a game. And, you know, I like to use sporting analogies, but it's almost like playing a season of football and having a plan and understanding that you're going to get injuries, you're going to have good wins and you're going to have bad times. But to succeed at the end of the day, you've got to have that long-term focus and keep your eye on the end goal. And whatever happens in the meantime, you just have to deal with it as it comes up. But it's really important for that reason. You do understand the rules of the game. You do understand where you are now, where you'd like to get to, and having a plan and putting that plan in place as well. So that's critically important.
Well, I also think you've got to understand what game you're playing, because if you're playing a different game to other people, then you shouldn't be taking their advice. And currently there's a lot of people talking about buying commercial property, and there's a lot of people playing the wrong game, thinking they should be buying commercial property when they're not at the right stage of the cycle. I guess there's also the game that people are telling you at the moment that, oh, we have all the data. There's this whole new wave of buyers agents out there who are data-driven and say, oh, we can find you the right property on the data. They don't have the on-the-ground perspective to analyse the data, because you can make data say almost anything. So I really appreciate the questions we've had, and if you've got any further questions, I think the easiest place to leave them is on Property Update, which I hope you subscribe to, and leave a comment in any of the blogs. But Brett, I know that at the moment there is all this concern. People are uncertain. But I also know that over the last couple of months, actually for much of this year, the number of inquiries we've had from home buyers and investors at Metropole is increased considerably over the last months of this building. I think people are recognising that they've just got to move on. There's too many people are just waiting for it all to be right, while strategic people are saying, okay, what can I do next? And for those who don't know, your team and my team at Metropole are much more than buyers agents. We help our clients safely grow their wealth and pass it on to future generations by giving property strategy advice. And while we're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, we're small enough to care. So if somebody here is interested in moving to the next level or just understanding their options, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, well, two things here. I think, first of all, investors are getting back into the market now. There's a combination of things there. I think, like you said, they're kind of sick of the 24-hour notice headlines, and they're just ready to get on with it. They probably understand that at some point interest rates are probably going to fall, whether it's later this year, early next year. So they're comfortable with that. They're not going to go any higher. And the other thing we're seeing that's getting investors back in the market as well is the fact that it's actually rents are actually rising. So we're getting quite strong yields and good rental returns at the moment, above average. So that's getting more people inquiring into that market as well. And then what that's actually causing in the market, and the reason why we're getting more home buyer inquiries, is because at some point there's going to be a tipping point, isn't there, Michael, where it's going to actually be cheaper to buy a property with rent soaring. So then they'll start to get back in the market. And a lot of the home buyers at the moment are really struggling to find good properties. We're down about 30 to 35%. So the ability to actually have someone look at those opportunities off market for you and find those things maybe coming pre-market are very, very valuable at the moment.
Sure, it is really hard. And I guess we have the perspective. So rather than flying in and flying out or getting the local estate agent to send you a FaceTime video, once our clients get a strategic plan, we help them implement the plan with our own on-the-ground teams in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. So my suggestion is, no matter where you are, if you're interested in taking advantage of what's still the early stage, most property cycles don't last 7 years or 18 years, but they last 4 years. We're 18 months or so into this cycle. This is the upturn stage, and the strong growth is going to still occur in many markets around Australia, but you can't just choose any property. If you do, you're going to end up the same statistic as the majority. You're going to end up with one or two properties. 92% of investors never get past their first or second property. So go to metropole.com.au and have a chat with one of our wealth strategists. Why not just explore your options and see what we can do for you? Thanks for your time today, Brett.
Thanks, Michael. You make a really good point. I think you could have bought it anywhere 5 years ago and done exceptionally well, but the market has turned, and now's the time to get professionals on your side. So good to be with you.
Thanks, mate.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset message, I'd like to explain to you that you should expect failure. And if you do, fear is going to lose its power over you. You see, one of the biggest things holding people back from the pursuit of success, whether it's in property investment, in relationships, in business, in anything, the thing that holds them back is the fact that they fear failure. This fear of failure causes them to second-guess themselves. They second-guess every move they're making. It causes people to overthink everything. It causes people to delay taking action. Overthinking, procrastination, if you think about it, that's really born out of this fear of failure. Interestingly, those who succeed in life do not think they're going to fail. They know it. They know their journey to success will be riddled with failures. It'll be messed up with mistakes. In short, they expect to fail. And when you expect to fail, all of a sudden fear loses all its power over you. When you no longer fear failure, you're going to feel empowered. You're going to feel empowered to take action. Yes, you'll mess up and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fail often, but you're also going to learn from your mistakes. You should learn from your failures. And as you learn, you're going to grow and you're going to improve. This growth is going to help you gain confidence, and this confidence is going to empower you to take even more action. So you've probably heard me say it before. I'm a real success at failure, but I get up one more time, and so should you. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?